The wind carried her name through the canyons that morning. Elara. He heard it like a whisper from God himself, the kind that cuts deep and won't let go. For 3 nights, Luke Carson hadn't slept. The note she'd left lay folded in his pocket, the ink smudged by a raindrop that might have been his own tear. "Don't follow me," she'd written. But he had, because every mile without her felt like a sin against his own soul. The sun rose blood-red over the Wyoming horizon, painting the dusty plains in a copper light. Luke tightened his grip on the reins, his chestnut gelding shifting beneath him. He stared down the endless trail, a path that seemed to stretch into eternity. Somewhere out there she was running from him, from the past, maybe even from herself. It was a familiar feeling, that desperate flight from something you can't outrun. They'd met 2 years before, in a town barely on the map called Willow Creek. She was a widow then, her quiet strength a beacon in the dusty general store where she worked. Her husband had been lost in a cattle stampede, a brutal end to a hard life. Luke had ridden in to trade bullets for bread, a tired ranch hand with more ghosts in his past than cattle in his herd. He was just passing through, or so he thought. But one look at her, at the way she carried her grief with a grace he'd never seen, and he knew he was in trouble. The good kind of trouble, the kind that makes a man want to be better. She had that rare strength, the kind forged in the fires of pain, not pride. It wasn't loud or boastful, it was a quiet resilience that drew you in. And little by little, in her company, he'd started to believe that a man could shed his old skin, that he could build a new life from the ashes of his past. He'd started to believe in second chances. But the night before she disappeared, the warmth of the campfire between them couldn't chase the chill from her words. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames, and said, "Luke, some people aren't meant to stay loved. Some just pass through your life to remind you what love costs." And just like that, with the dawn, she was gone. Now, as he guided his horse across a dry creek bed, his eyes caught something. Wagon tracks, leading west. Fresh ones. His heart hammered against his ribs. He knew that wheel pattern. Her old supply cart, the one with the broken right rim she'd always meant to fix. A jolt of hope, sharp and painful, shot through him. He wasn't chasing a ghost. He was on her trail. He urged his horse on, following the tracks as the sky began to bleed into shades of purple and orange and the coyotes started their mournful song. The air grew colder, the shadows longer. Then he saw it, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from behind a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees. A campfire. His breath caught in his throat. Luke slid silently off his horse, his boots making no sound on the soft earth. He crept forward, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his revolver. And there she was. Elara. She sat by the fire, a worn shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the dying flames as if searching for an answer in the embers. Her face looked older, harder, etched with a weariness that went bone deep. But she was still beautiful, achingly so, like a scar you'd never want to heal because it's a part of who you are. He stood there for a moment, just watching her, a storm of emotions raging inside him. He'd found her. But what now? Before he could form the words, her voice cut through the quiet night, low and without surprise. "Couldn't listen, could you?" she said, without even turning to look at him. Luke froze, caught in the open. The sound of her voice was both a comfort and a knife to the gut. He finally took a step forward. "Didn't come to change your mind," he lied, his own voice sounding rough to his ears. "Just came to make sure you're safe." She let out a soft, bitter laugh that held no humor. "Safe? There ain't a place left in this land that's safe, Luke. Not from men, not from memory." He wanted to bridge the distance between them, to wrap his arms around her and tell her it would be all right, but something in her tone held him back. It was a wall of fear, not of him, but of something else, something that was chasing her just as relentlessly as he was. "Elara," he said gently, his voice barely a whisper. "What happened? What are you running from?" She finally lifted her eyes to his, and in the firelight he saw they were glinting with something raw and haunted. "You ever kill a man who didn't deserve it?" she asked, her question hanging in the air like smoke. Luke felt his chest tighten, the memory of his own past sins rising to the surface. "Once," he admitted, the word tasting like ash. "Then you know," she whispered. "You know what it does to you. The stain it leaves." Before he could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A rifle shot. The fire sputtered as a bullet smashed into the log right beside her, sending splinters flying. Instinct took over. Luke threw himself forward, tackling her to the ground as another shot tore through the night air where she had just been sitting. Her horse screamed in panic, its terror echoing his own. "They found me," she whispered, her body trembling against his. "I told you not to follow." Luke drew his revolver, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He pulled her behind the cover of a large rock, his eyes scanning the dark, oppressive tree line. He could see movement, shadows flitting between the trunks. 3, maybe 4 men. "Elara," he hissed, his voice tight with urgency. "Who the hell are they?" She looked at him, her face pale in the faint glow of the dying fire, her voice trembling with a terrifying certainty. "Men who know what I did." The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had started. The night went still again, a heavy, suffocating silence that was more menacing than the noise. Then a voice called out from the darkness, cold and slow, dripping with malice. "Hand her over, cowboy, and maybe you live." Luke's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He raised his revolver, aiming toward the sound of the voice, a blind shot into the unknown. "You'll have to ride through me first." There was only silence. Then the faint, chilling creak of a saddle. They were getting closer. He glanced at Elara, her eyes wide with terror filled with tears. "Luke, you should have let me go." The next bullet didn't aim for them. It shattered the lantern beside them, plunging the entire camp into absolute darkness. And just before everything went black, swallowed by the night, Luke heard her whisper, a soft, broken sound that would haunt him forever. "Run." The night bled into dawn. Smoke hung low over the trees, and the air, thick and heavy, smelled of gunpowder and fear. I woke to a searing pain, a burning line across my shoulder where dried blood crusted my coat. My horse was gone. And Elara. Elara was gone too. I pushed myself up, the world spinning, the ground cold and hard beneath my palms. The camp was a disaster. Boot prints everywhere, splintered branches. But they'd left one thing behind. Elara's locket. I clicked it open. Inside, a small, delicate sketch of a child's face, a boy, and, folded tightly behind it, a name, Thomas Hargreave. A knot of ice formed in my gut. I knew that name. Everyone out here knew it. Thomas Hargreave, the Baron of Red Hollow, a man whose word was law and whose law was often a noose. They said he'd lost his only son in a fire 2 winters back, the same winter Elara had vanished from Willow Creek. I looked toward the rising sun, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. "What the hell did you get yourself into, Elara?" By noon, I'd made it to a trading post a few miles west. The keeper, an old scout named Merrick, was sweeping dust from his porch. He didn't even look up at first. "You look like death chewed you and spat you out," he muttered. I ignored him. "Seen a woman? Brown hair, gray shawl, in a small wagon. Might have come through at dawn." Merrick stopped sweeping and squinted, his mind working. "Can't say I saw a wagon, but I saw 4 riders headed for Red Hollow. Had a 5th tied behind a horse. Looked like a woman." My heart sank to my boots. He must have seen the look on my face because he added, quieter now, "She looked up once, like she wanted someone to see her. Guess you just did." I tossed a coin onto the porch rail and swung myself onto a fresh horse. "Keep your head down, Merrick. Things might get ugly." Red Hollow wasn't a town. It was a kingdom built on cattle and fear. Hargreaves' men patrolled the ridges with rifles, and anyone who crossed him had a habit of disappearing into the vast, empty prairie. I rode slow, letting the sun fall behind the canyons, turning the dust to gold around me. I reached the main ranch house as twilight painted the sky. It stood wide and proud, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. In the yard below, 2 guards were smoking by a water trough, their laughter thin and brittle on the wind. I tied my horse behind a haystack and settled in to wait. Then a scream cut through the dusk. It was faint, but it was enough to twist my stomach into a knot. I moved closer, my hand on my pistol. Through a half-broken window, I saw her. Alara. Bound to a chair, her face bruised but her spirit defiant. And across from her, a man in a velvet vest and silver spurs. Thomas Hargreave. "You took something from me," Hargreave said. His voice was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. "And you will tell me where it is, before dawn." Alara spat a mix of blood and defiance on the floor. "You'll never find him." I froze. Him. The boy. I crept around the house, found a back door slightly ajar. The hallway smelled of whiskey and old wood. A single guard stood by the stairs, dozing against the wall. I slipped behind him, pistol raised. One silent, heavy blow, and the man dropped without a sound. Then I heard Alara's voice again, trembling but fierce. "You think money buys redemption, Thomas? You burned your own son's mother just to keep your name clean." I stopped dead in my tracks. Hargreave just laughed, a low, chilling sound. "And you took the child, my blood. You ran." Alara's chin lifted. "Because you would have turned him into you." That was it. I stepped into the room, gun drawn. "That's enough." Hargreave turned slowly, a calm, unnerving smile spreading under his gray mustache. "Ah, the cowboy who doesn't know what he's dying for." "Let her go," I said, my voice steady. He leaned back in his chair, enjoying this. "You care for her, don't you?" "I owe her my life." "Then I'll give you a choice. Tell me where my son is and you both walk out of here. Lie to me, and she dies first." Alara met my eyes, her own a mix of pleading and steel. "Don't say a word," she begged. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't know where the boy was. Hell, I didn't even know for sure if he was still alive. But I knew one thing. I wasn't about to let her die alone. I took a slow step forward, my revolver steady in my hand. "I reckon you'll have to shoot us both then." Hargreave sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. "Pity." The room exploded. Gunfire, smoke, shattering glass. I dove sideways, firing twice as a guard crashed through the doorway, rifle raised. Alara kicked her chair back, sending it into his legs. My bullet finished him before he hit the floor. "Come on!" I yelled, slashing the ropes from her wrists. We burst through a side door into the cool night, bullets sparking off the wagon wheels behind us. Alara grabbed the reins of a tethered horse, swung up, and reached her hand down to me. "Luke, ride!" I leapt onto the saddle behind her just as one last shot cracked through the air. The horse screamed, stumbled, but it kept running, fueled by pure terror. We didn't stop, didn't dare to even breathe, until the ranch lights were nothing but fireflies in the distance. I finally pulled the horse to a halt, both of us gasping in the dark. I turned her toward me. "Tell me the truth, Alara. Who is the boy?" Her hands trembled as she reached into her coat. She pulled out a small wooden pendant, carved with the initials T.H. "He's not just Hargreaves' son," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's ours." The world fell silent. The wind, the horse's ragged breathing, everything just stopped. "What did you just say?" Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked cheeks. "Luke, before you ever came to Willow Creek, I had already met Thomas. I worked on his ranch, and when I left him, I was carrying his child." She swallowed hard, the truth hanging between us like a ghost. You raised him for a while? You just didn't know it. My hand fell away from the reins. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Elara, I whispered, my own voice a stranger's. Where is he now? She looked up at the cold, unforgiving stars. Hidden. But he won't be for long. Hargreaves' men are already on that trail. And from far behind us, faint but rising, came the sound I'd been dreading, the unmistakable thunder of galloping hooves. This story is just beginning. If you want to find out what happens to Luke, Elara, and the boy, make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on. You won't want to miss the next part. Thanks for watching. The desert dawn burned pale orange as two riders cut silhouettes against a horizon that offered no forgiveness. My arm was bleeding through my coat, but I barely felt it. Every hoofbeat hammered a single thought into my skull. Find the boy. Protect him. Elara rode ahead, her face a mask of stone, but her eyes were haunted. The confession she'd made last night still hung between us, thick and heavy like gun smoke. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words turned to dust in my throat. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice raspy. He's in the hills north of Copper Valley. A trapper named Whitlow's been keeping him safe. He thinks Thomas is his nephew. I nodded, the grim reality setting in. Then we get there before Hargreave does. But even as I said it, the faint thunder of riders grew louder behind us. Vengeance was on our heels, and it was closing in fast. By noon, the sky had turned mean. A cold, gray storm rolled in from the mountains, and the rain came down hard and sudden. It washed the blood and dust from my face as we pushed our horses up a narrow, treacherous pass. At the edge of a ridge we saw it, a small cabin, with a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. Hope. Elara was off her horse before it even stopped, running to the door and pounding on it with her fists. It creaked open, and there he was. A small boy, maybe 6 years old, with a mess of dark curls and bright green eyes. The same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "Ma," he whispered, his voice small and uncertain. Elara dropped to her knees and pulled him into a desperate hug. "Tommy," she breathed, her tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her face. An old trapper, Whitlow, stepped out behind the boy, a rifle held steady in his hands. He looked past Elara, his gaze landing on me. "Been expectin' trouble," he muttered, his voice like gravel. "Figured those riders would show before supper." "They're close," I told him, swinging down from my horse. "We'll have to hold them here." Just then, the storm broke wide open. Thunder cracked overhead like cannon fire. Whitlow and I took positions behind a split-rail fence, our rifles ready. Elara rushed Tommy back inside the cabin, and the candlelight flickered like a fragile heartbeat against the rain-streaked window. Soon, 5 riders emerged from the downpour, climbing the trail. Hargreave was at the front, his posture slick and calm, as if the storm was merely an inconvenience. "Carson," he shouted, his voice cutting through the wind, "you can't fight what's already mine." My reply was sharp, loaded with all the fury I'd been holding back. "You lost that right the day you burned his mother alive." A thin, cruel smile spread across Hargreave's face. "Then I'll take the boy by force." He raised his hand, a silent command, and the shooting started. The world dissolved into chaos. Gunfire split the air, mud flew up in crimson bursts, and the rain fell like a curtain. Whitlow was a seasoned fighter, firing clean and fast, dropping one of Hargreaves' men before he could even aim. My shoulder screamed in protest with every shot I fired, but I ignored the pain. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't. Inside the cabin, I could imagine Elara clutching her son, her voice a fierce whisper. "Don't be afraid, baby. Don't you dare be afraid." Then a sudden, deadly silence fell as both sides paused to reload. Through the smoke and mist, Hargreave rode forward, his rifle now in hand. "Enough games," he growled, his eyes fixed on me. "You think you can steal my blood?" I stepped out from behind the fence, soaked to the bone and shaking, my revolver held low at my side. "He ain't your blood any more." Hargreave dismounted, the thick mud clinging to his expensive boots. "You don't get to decide that." I raised my gun. "Neither do you." 2 shots echoed as one, their sound swallowed by a deafening clap of thunder. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Then Hargreave crumpled, falling slowly, silently, face first into the mud. I dropped to my knees, clutching my chest. A sharp, burning pain spread through me. The world tilted sideways. "Luke!" Alara's scream tore through the air as she ran from the cabin. She caught me just before I hit the ground. "Stay with me, please. Stay with me." I managed a faint smile, the rain dripping from the brim of my hat. "You said." "Not to follow you." Her tears fell freely onto my face, mixing with the rain. "And you did anyway," she choked out. I reached up, my fingers trembling, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Couldn't let you face it alone." Hours later, the storm passed. The air felt clean and new. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the valley. I woke up in a bed inside the cabin, my wound bandaged, my breathing shallow but steady. Tommy sat in a chair beside the bed, watching me with those familiar green eyes. "Ma says you're a hero," he said softly. I gave a weak smile. "Nah, son. Just a fool who rode the wrong road for the right reason." He tilted his head, curious. "Will you stay with us now?" My gaze shifted to the doorway, where Alara stood watching us. Her eyes were full of everything we had both run from and everything we had now found. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I reckon I will." The weeks that followed turned the cabin into a home. Smoke rose from the chimney each morning, a beacon of peace. Laughter, a sound I hadn't heard in years, echoed through the valley. I mended fences and taught the boy how to ride. Alara sang while she hung laundry, her voice carried on the wind. But some nights, when the wind howled through the canyon, I'd find myself outside, looking east toward Willow Creek, toward all the miles of regret I'd left behind. On one of those nights, Alara came out quietly and wrapped her arms around me, resting her head on my chest. "You still thinking about the past?" she whispered. I shook my head, my eyes on the endless blanket of stars above us. "No, ma'am," I said. "Just thanking the Lord you didn't let it win." She smiled, a soft, beautiful thing in the firelight from the cabin. "Maybe love's not about who follows who, Luke. Maybe it's about finding your way home. Together." I leaned down and kissed her forehead, the warmth of the fire at our backs and a future ahead of us. "Then I'm home," I whispered. "Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales from the dusty trails. See you next time."